What's going on? You guys doing all right today? Good to see you. About 4 months ago, maybe a little more than that, Brandon came and said, hey, after we're done with the book of Romans, we're going to study the book of Jonah, which I found really, really funny because Brandon actually has a history with the book of Jonah. You guys might not know this, but he actually got kicked out of preschool because of Jonah. And he says, so yeah, we're going to do the book of Jonah. He says, oh, and by the way, I need you to teach on week 4. I was like, okay, because I know his history. And I'm like, well, where are you going to be at when I'm teaching? He says, I'm going to be out of the country with my son. I'll get back to like that Tuesday. So I'm like, okay, great. Now I can tell you the story about why he got kicked out of preschool and not have to worry about him being around here. So if you've ever met Brandon's mom, she is a really sweet, soft-spoken lady. And I met her close to 7 years ago, and I did the same thing everybody else does when they meet the parents of their friend, right? I'm like, okay, hey, tell me about what Brandon was like growing up. Tell me some stories of some things he did. I want some dirt on him. Well, because she's sweet and soft-spoken, she's not like my mom, and she didn't put him on blast. But I kept prompting her, and so I asked her, I said, well, just tell me something. She says, well, you know, there was a time when he was 4 years old, he got sent home. I said, well, tell me about that. She said, well, they were supposed to be drawing something, and so Brandon drew this stick figure with this blob around it, not the best drawer, and the teacher came and said, well, Brandon, what is that? He says, well, it's a picture of Jonah and the whale. Well, for some reason, this teacher was like just a little, had a little bit of an attitude. She says, well, you know that like that story's not true, right? And he says, well, of course it's true. I mean, in the Bible, it talks about it. She says, I know, but like, it's just using it as an example. It didn't really happen. And he says, yes, it happened. I know it happened. And she says, well, how are you ever going to prove that it really happened? He says, well, you know what? When I get to heaven, I'll ask Jonah about it. And she says, okay. She says, well, what are you going to do if you get to heaven and Jonah's not there? And he thought for a second, and he said, then you can ask him. Now, just for the record, I totally made that story up. That didn't really happen. Now you know why I can tell stories out of the country. That's not true. But the story of Jonah really is true. And we're going to start Jonah chapter 2 today. We've been looking at Jonah chapter 1, and we actually been there for about 3 weeks because Jonah chapter 1, it sounds crazy. Like I said, it's true, but it's crazy. So if you haven't been here, it's going to kind of give you a quick recap of the story. What we have in Jonah chapter 1 is God spoke to Jonah. We're told that he says, hey, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to preach against this evil ways. Now, this isn't odd because Jonah was a prophet. It was his job to take what God told him to do and then go do it. But unlike other times in his life, he decided I didn't want to do that because he didn't like the Ninevites. So he decided to jump on a boat and go in the opposite direction because that's what geniuses do when God calls us to do something. We jump in a boat and go in the opposite direction. Well, he's in this boat and God realized that Jonah's playing games, so he sent this really massive storm. This storm was actually so violent that the Bible tells us that the boat that the people were in was breaking apart, and the people inside the boat were freaking out, all except for one person. And that one person was Jonah. He wasn't freaking out because he was asleep. That's often what happens. People who cause the problems are the ones who are most at rest, and everybody else is picking up the pieces, right? But we're told that the captain wakes Jonah up, says, we got to figure out what's going on. We all need everybody to pray to their God, and we need to cast lots to figure out whose God is causing this. Now, casting lots is like kind of throwing dice. It's like throwing craps or something, okay? And so what happens is they do this, they cast lots, and Jonah either won or lost, depending on how you want to look at it, and the lots fell on him, and the people are like, what have you done? He says, well, I'm a Hebrew, I'm a follower of God, I'm a prophet, God told me to go one way, I went the other, and here we are. And these guys are like, man, we got to get back to shore. So they start rowing really hard to try to beat the storm to get back to shore, and they just couldn't do it. So they said, what do we do now? And Jonah says, hey, just throw me overboard. He didn't want to jump. He's like, throw me overboard. So the men threw him overboard, and we're told that as soon as he did, the storm stopped. And when the storm stopped, these people on the boat were like, well, I guess his God was the God causing this. And so at that point, they realized that Jonah's God was the one true God. And we're told they began to worship at that moment, and they believed in God. And then we're also told that Jonah was swallowed by a big fish. So in summary, in Jonah chapter 1, we see that Jonah ran. And what we're going to see today in Jonah chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, is that Jonah prayed. But before we look at Jonah chapter 2, I want us to talk about a group of people. Specifically, I want us to talk about annoying kids. Now, if you have a younger sibling, if you've ever babysat, or if you've raised kids, you know that they all go through a really annoying phase. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not talking about middle school, okay? I'm talking about someone else. I'm talking about that really annoying why phase, where they ask why about everything. Why is the sky blue? Because it's blue. Well, why is it not blue today? Because it's nighttime, okay? That's crazy questions like, why do I have to pick up my toys? Why do I have to brush my teeth? Why do they throw moon pies off the side of floats? I still don't understand that, by the way. If you guys can ever explain it to me, tell me. They ask crazy questions, like even like really dumb questions, like why is Dad yelling at the TV on Sunday afternoon? They ask questions like, why does Mom get so mad when I pee on the toilet seat? They ask why about everything. There isn't anything they don't ask why about. And if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, your kids are going to mature past this why phase quickly. But if you're unlucky, your kid will live there for a while. And if you're really, really unlucky, your child will never pass the why phase. Now, unfortunately, my parents, my wife, my family, my friends, and my coworkers can all attest that I have never matured past the why phase. It's like an obsession for me. I ask why about everything. Everything. I want to know the why behind everything. And people that know me know that by asking why, I've learned some things I wouldn't normally know because they could share it with me. And people that know me know that they love telling me the why behind things. At least that's what I tell myself, right? But one of the things that asking the why question has done for me is, believe it or not, it has actually helped keep me out of trouble at times. Have you guys ever heard this statement? There's no such thing as a dumb question. That's really dumb. There are dumb questions, okay? There are. But here's the deal. Even though there's dumb questions, ask them anyways, because dumb questions keep you away from making dumb mistakes. And that's what I found in my life over and over and over again. Now, I'm not saying I always do it, but at least I found out. Now, when I look at the book of Jonah, because I'm stuck in this why phase, I've never matured past that, I have a couple why questions about the book of Jonah. Specifically, I have two. One, why in the world did Jonah run away from God's purpose to go talk to the Ninevites? That doesn't make any sense to me. He's a prophet. Jonah, you've got one job. God tells you where to go do it. That's what you do. But he decided to go in the opposite direction. And I don't understand really why. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And the second one is kind of more of on the personal side, but I have a feeling by the time we're done here, some of you guys are like, oh yeah, I can connect with that. My second why is this. Why do I have a hard time connecting with the story of Jonah? See, when I look at the story of Jonah, I really, really have a hard time learning the lessons that I should learn from because I have a hard time understanding the whole situation going on. I struggle connecting with it. There's a few stories in the Bible that fall in that category for me, and then there's some that are really easy for me. Anytime something happens with Peter, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. A lot of Paul's situation, I can see that. But with this one, I struggle with it. So let's look at the whys, because these whys are really important. So first, why did Jonah run in the opposite direction when God told him to go to this city to reach the people? Now, there's never going to be a chance or a time that we're going to know for certainty, other than when we get to heaven and ask him, the answer to this question. But there is a really good chance that it's for one of two reasons, or maybe a combination of both. Number one, he was probably very intimidated by the Ninevites. And you guys are going to learn a little bit more here in a little bit. They're a very intimidating group of people. The second reason was probably because he felt that their sin was so far gone that they didn't deserve an opportunity to hear about God, because they didn't deserve to have a relationship with God. And you guys will hear a little bit more about that in a second too. See, while the book of Jonah doesn't tell us much about Nineveh, there's another book in the Bible that does. A book of the Bible, I'm guessing you might know it's there. Maybe you don't know it's there. It's a book of the Bible I'd never even think of. It's the book called Nahum. I'm sure many of you guys didn't wake up this morning and think, oh, dude, I just want to read Nahum. That doesn't happen, okay? But the book of Nahum is really important to our study of the book of Jonah for a reason. See, the book of Nahum was written 150 years later after the situation with Jonah is going on here. What we're going to see is Jonah went and he actually obeyed God later on in the story. And the people repented and they got right with God. But what we hear from history, which brings us to the book of Nahum, is over the next 150 years, these Ninevites decided, okay, I'm going to start drifting back into sin. I'm going to start drifting back away from God. And they ultimately ended up turning their back on God. But God was not done with the Ninevites yet. So he sent another prophet by the name of Nahum to go reach them. Now, Nahum is helpful for us because the book of Nahum tells us a little bit about what Nineveh was like, okay? So first, I said it was a very intimidating place. I do not know of any place in human history, let alone right now, that is anything like the city of Nineveh. See, one of the reasons why it was so intimidating is because it was very, very rich and very powerful. When I say rich and powerful, I'm talking about like, in order to equate it to today, these aren't people that made hundreds of thousands of dollars. These weren't people that made millions of dollars. These were people who made billions upon billions of dollars. They were very, very, very successful. And Jonah was not like them. See, this is what Scripture tells us in Nahum chapter 2, verse 9. Concerning how rich they were, it says that their supply is endless. You know what this means? This means that, like, it didn't matter what they bought. They could go out and buy 15 Ferraris or whatever and a few Porsches and a few mansions, but they're so rich that the interest they're making on that money that day is more than the amount they could actually spend. Their supply was endless. In the book of Nahum, we also see that they were super successful. Most people in that community didn't just have one business, they had a lot of businesses. And because of that, they were a commercial powerhouse. Check this out, chapter 3, verse 16 in Nahum, it says this: the number of their merchants were more than the stars of the sky. See, here's the deal. If we're all honest with ourselves, people who are not like us, they could be very intimidating. And these are people who had a ton of money, a ton of resources, were very, very brilliant. So it had been really easy for Jonah to look at this and be like, I don't know about that. We're all intimidated by somebody. I'm intimidated by people that are different. I'm intimidated by some of you guys. Let me explain this, okay? So I love living in Ocean Springs. But if you know my story, you know that this is like the smallest city I've ever lived in. I think that my next closest city to this size was 4 million, okay? So it's a big difference. And so if you put me in Brooklyn at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm okay. I mean, I know how to navigate Brooklyn. I'm good there. But if you stick me out in the middle of nowhere, which is where some of you guys like to go, I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, it scares me. And those of you guys that like that, you're intimidating to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, you either have a lot more courage than I do, or you're extremely naive to know the fact that you're about to die, okay? I mean, you don't realize that there's like a snake and a lion and a polar bear about ready to trounce on you. You have no clue. And if they don't get you, you don't realize that there's a dude in the bushes with like a theme song and a hockey mask. You just have no clue. But when I get out in the middle of nowhere, I know that's going to happen. And so, man, I don't like it at all. I mean, it scares the tar out of me. People are like, oh, it's great. Look at the stars. No, I'm looking around me. And so for those of you guys that like that, man, seriously, I mean, you are intimidating to me because I'm like, man, there's something different about the way you're made than I'm made. Jonah's looking at these people, and they're really rich. They're very successful. He's looking and says, man, they're not like me. They're different than me, and that can be intimidating. So that could be a reason why. The second reason is because they were full of sin. And so he probably thought, man, I don't want to go tell them about God because they don't deserve to hear about God. See, when you have as much money as they did, you start to look for thrills in different places. And that's really what the Ninevites did. So they looked for fun and different things that even money couldn't buy. They were told in the book of Nahum that they were vile and that they were full of idols. When they would get bored, you know what they do for fun? They would choose violence. In the book of Nahum, verse 3, verse 4, or chapter 3, verse 4, it says this. It says that they were a city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victim. These were mean people. In that same verse a little bit later, it says that not only was this sin in their community so rampant, it is affecting other cities and other communities. It says that they had enslaved other nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. So these people were so evil. They were vile. They were idolaters. They went after violence. And their sin of prostitution and witchcraft was impacting so many people around them. So those of you guys like me that are the annoying kid that never grow up, and you sit there and say, man, why in the world would Jonah have gone the opposite direction? Well, probably for one of two reasons or a combination of both. It was very intimidating. You could even add a second. It probably was pretty scary. And third, because their sin was so far gone that he did not think they deserved to hear about who God was. Now, I mentioned earlier that I have a second question. The second question is this: why do I have a harder time connecting with this story than I do other stories in the Bible? Let me try to explain it this way. I have a theory. At the church here at Mosaic, whenever we're interviewing people, we ask a bunch of get-to-know-you questions. You know what the purpose of those are. We want to figure out what makes people tick. We want to figure out what their personality is. And we really want to know how self-aware they are, because we've already talked to their references. So we're trying to figure out, are they self-aware? So we have a question. And the question is this: if you were to get in trouble, would it be because of something you did or because of something you said? Now, loaded question, right? Now, I'm always amazed when we ask that question, like, oh, because of something I did. I get amazed because that's not the world I live in. The world I live in is I get in trouble almost 100% of the time because I stick my foot in my mouth at something I said. So just for grins here, let's have fun for a second. Okay, so I'm asking you guys this question. Show of hands. If I asked you if you were going to get in trouble, would it be because of something you did? If that's you, I want you to raise your hand real high. Okay, look around the room. Don't trust these people. No, I'm joking. Now, the second group, just don't talk to these people. If you are going to get in trouble